I'm telling you, of all the cruises I've taken, sailing Alaska, that's by far the most memorable experience. And truth be told, there's a lot that's completely different about cruising there that even surprised me. That's why I've rounded up some of my favorite tips and things to know to help you prepare for your Alaskan cruise. Now, if you've sailed Caribbean cruises, then you know the vibe on the ship is fun, it's energetic, music's playing, drinks are flowing. On a cruise to Alaska, it is a bit different. The atmosphere that you find on board is going to be much more subdued. For instance, when I sailed, there wasn't a big sail away party or the hairiest chess contest by the pool like there normally is. There wasn't constant tropical music playing either. Instead, the vibe is still fun, but it's less of a party and more of a relaxing vacation. In most cities, there's one cruise port with multiple different terminals. If sailing from Seattle to Alaska, however, it's a bit different. The two main piers are Pier 66 and Pier 91. And these two spots are about 2 miles away from each other. Pier 66 is near downtown and is home mainly to Norwegian Cruise Line ships. Pier 91, it generally serves all the other cruise lines that sail from Seattle. Your cruise line will let you know which terminal you'll sail from in the booking documents, but just be aware before you head to one pier or the other. So much of taking an Alaskan cruise is about the scenery, but you can't spend all of your hours outside watching nature go by. That's why it's a good idea to book a ship that has a lot of indoor activities and things to do. Given that the weather in Alaska can be rainy and cool, especially with the wind when a ship is sailing, indoor things to do give you a chance to have fun while also staying out of the nasty weather. In general, you can find a lot more to do on the bigger and newer ships that sail Alaska, say those built in the last 10 or 15 years. One thing that surprised me is how different Alaskan ports are compared to Caribbean cruise ports. Many spots you visit in the Caribbean are essentially 100% tourism. You go through a port area and then everything revolves around cruise passengers. In Alaska, you're visiting places that depend on tourism, but are real cities themselves. For instance, Juneau is a common stop and it's a state capital. In that way, I find that the Alaskan ports are much more interesting to explore than a spot where you just go and sit on the beach. When you sail to Alaska, shore excursions, they are a must. While you can explore around the port of call on your own, excursions give you a chance for everything from viewing glaciers to panning for gold, to sightseeing to even whale watching. The things that you can do in Alaska on a shore excursion, they are unlike what you can do anywhere else in the world. Just be prepared for some sticker shock. Many excursions, they run into the hundreds of dollars per person compared to offerings on Caribbean cruises that are typically much cheaper. Also, be sure to book as early as possible for the most choice. If you've never spent time this far north, be ready for long days. In Alaskan ports, the sun can rise around 4 a.m. and set after 10. Without the rhythm of a normal day that we're used to farther south, you will likely rise earlier than you're used to and go to bed later. That's on top of any time difference between Alaska and where you live. For example, it's 4 hours behind the East Coast. You might find, like I did, that after 3 or 4 days, the long days catch up with you and you end up crashing early to make up for lost sleep. Head on a Caribbean cruise and the schedule is familiar. You show up at the port of call early in the morning and you'll depart in that evening. Some ports are like that in Alaska, but not all of them. For instance, you might actually show up in the afternoon and then leave even later in the evening. And instead of having a full day in port, sometimes you just have a few hours. It's definitely a different style than you may be used to, so be sure that you pack everything in that you want to do and see. The height of the Alaskan cruise season runs this summer, but most ships actually start sailing in May and don't finish up the season until September. Those May and September trips, when families that have kids in school can't sail, they are usually cheaper due to the lower demand. You can find the same cabin on the same trip for hundreds of dollars less by sailing during one of these 2 months versus the height of summer. One issue with sailing on most cruises is that your phone doesn't work. If sailing to Alaska, there's at least a chance, depending on your carrier, that you'll have your normal cell service when in port. Since Alaska is part of the US, your cell service provider may also offer service in this area without any additional charges. Now, I personally use Mint Mobile, and when I visited, I didn't have any coverage, but I did talk to a lot of other passengers with mainstream carriers like AT&T or Verizon, and they work just fine. Just about everyone will tell you to spring for a balcony cabin on an Alaskan cruise, and for good reason. The views, they can be spectacular. But just remember that things can get pretty chilly on those balconies. With the ship underway, there's a constant breeze blowing, combined with already cool temperatures in this part of the world. So you can definitely take in the views, but don't think that you're going to be out there sitting on the balcony quite as much as you think. No one would argue that some cruise lines offer more luxury or nicer ships than others. It's a fact of cruising. But if you're most interested in seeing Alaska and not the ship, then most cruise lines offer similar routes. In other words, you can see the same sights as someone paying double or triple what you paid on going with a cheaper line. In particular, I found that in the past, Holland America has fares that are often inexpensive compared to other rivals. Now, you're going to be bound by airline restrictions if you fly into port, but if not, don't be afraid to overpack for your trip. Alaska can throw a lot of different weather at you in a short period of time, meaning different clothing is needed. Add in things like elegant night, and you've got something else to pack for. Meanwhile, it's not so easy to just run out and get anything that you might have forgotten at home. Cruise lines don't charge for baggage, so bring pretty much as you want within reason. Sailing from Seattle, Washington to Alaska, one quirk is that recreational marijuana is legal in both states. However, it is a bad idea to bring it onto the ship, and it is against the rules. Cruise ships, they follow federal law, which says that pot's illegal. Plus, the ship travels internationally, making it an even worse idea to bring, even though it is legal in Canada too, but you cannot bring it into the country with you. Instead, if you want to enjoy yourself that way, you can buy and partake in ports of call while visiting. Just leave any extra on land. These days, almost all of us, including me, use our phone as our camera. While phone cameras are great for most shots, they often lack in zoom capability. If you want to spot the wildlife in Alaska and catch a snapshot, then you'll want to invest in a decent camera with a zoom feature. This will allow you to get stunning pictures of the beauty of Alaska even if you are quite a distance from your subject. For instance, during my cruise, I spotted whales breaching the surface of the water while we were sailing, but the photos I took with my phone, they don't barely show anything at all. So if you're sailing from the United States and you're sailing to another US state, why do you need a passport or birth certificate to travel? Cruises stop in Canada for at least one port of call to satisfy requirements put on them by US law. That means you technically leave the US, sail to a foreign country, and then re-enter. It is best, by all means, to have a passport, but if your cruise starts and ends in the same port, you can travel with a government-issued birth certificate and photo ID. One of the big draws of cruising is that it can be a cheap vacation. Head to the Caribbean, and for a few days, you might find a fare that's as little as $200 per person. That's not the case for Alaskan cruises. Expect to spend significantly more. Most trips for a week start at about $500 per person for the cheapest rooms in the shoulder seasons. Peak times to sail see prices that start around $800 for an interior cabin and even more for those balconies. You add in port fees, taxes, gratuity, and the charges for double occupancy, and you can expect to spend about $2,000 at a minimum. Don't forget the cost of flights to the port as well, and shore excursions, which, as I said, are a must. Think of all the recent headlines regarding travel and health, and then add on all the crazy stuff that we've seen with the airlines. Yeah, having some travel insurance can give you peace of mind for sure. If you're taking any vacation, but especially a trip to remote regions like Alaska, getting insurance for your trip is a no-brainer. The good news is that it doesn't cost that much, usually just a small fraction of the cost of flying to the Northwest and then sailing to Alaska. Don't forget it, and remember that buying earlier is always better as it offers the most coverage. Haven't subscribed to this channel yet? I hope you will and get all the best tips and advice about everything cruising. And remember, if you're about to sail Alaska, then you're going to love it. Be sure to check out Cruzely.com for more on Alaskan cruises. And until next time, happy sailing.